Alright, so in the last few lectures we looked at a promising theory of perceptual knowledge called representative realism, which overcame the difficulties that plagued direct realism, the first theory that we looked at. Well, there's some problems. Yes, again, this theory, like the other, had problems, and I'm sorry. I might be giving you mental whiplash at this point, but thus is the nature of philosophy. But sometimes coming to understand reality can be hard, and this is how we go about it. So let's just tough it up and face the music. So we're going to look at the British philosopher Berkeley. It looks like Berkeley, but it's actually pronounced Berkeley. And his famous challenge to the theory of representative realism today. So Berkeley agrees with the representative realist that we only directly perceive sensory ideas. But he's going to challenge representative realism on several fronts. He's going to first challenge the primary-secondary quality distinction. And he's going to have two arguments against that. Second, he's going to challenge the causation and resemblance theses with two additional arguments. So in this lecture, we're going to look at four arguments Berkeley offers against representative realism. So let's take a first look at his arguments against the primary-secondary quality distinction. And first we should do some review. So recall that representative realists distinguish between primary and secondary qualities to handle cases of perceptual relativity. For example, when the candy tastes sweet to you but bitter to me, the reason is because taste is a secondary quality, and secondary qualities are mind-dependent. They're partially dependent on the constitution of the perceiver. In that case, then there would be no conflict or contradiction in the candy tasting sweet to you and bitter to me, because the taste of the candy, again, the sweetness and bitterness, is a secondary quality, and as such, it is not in the candy. It's not a mind-independent property or quality of the candy. But instead, our different sensations of the candy are caused by the candy's microscopic structure. That, however, is a primary quality. So, our sensory ideas of primary qualities then are caused by, as well as resemble the primary qualities of the candy. Thus, primary qualities, unlike secondary qualities, are mind-independent. But our secondary ideas involving secondary qualities are caused by, but do not resemble, the candy's microstructure. Thus, they are mind-dependent. Alright, that's just review. I know I've moved through it fairly quickly, but we covered this in greater depth in the last lecture. Well, the first argument Berkeley offers against the primary-secondary quality distinction is what we'll call the variability argument. And this is an objection Berkeley lodges. Well, I'll just read what I wrote. He says, the first objection Berkeley lodges against the primary-secondary quality distinction is that the primary qualities vary as much from the perceiver to perceiver as the mind-dependent secondary qualities. So, just as secondary qualities vary from perceiver to perceiver, the candy's sweet to me, it's sour to you. So as well do the primary qualities vary from perceiver to perceiver. We'll first read what old Brit wrote. Berkeley writes, now, why we may not as well argue that figure and extension are not patterns or resemblances of qualities existing in matter, because to the same eye at different stations, or eyes of a different texture at the same station, they appear various, and cannot therefore be images of anything settled and determinate without the mind. So let's unpack this. Take the example of the shape and size of a penny. Well, this will vary depending on where the perceiver is located. So look directly above a penny. It looks circular. Now, move at a different angle where you're not directly above it. Well, the penny will appear elliptical. So, further, if you hold the penny close to your eye, it looks big. So hold your penny close to your eye and then put a chair in front of you. The penny could look bigger than the chair you see in this distance. So here's an example of a penny looking right above it. It's circular. But then at an angle, it's somewhat elliptical. If you looked at the penny at an even greater angle, it would be really elliptical. Well, not that kind of elliptical. Hi, Grandma. These kind of tricks, or these features of perception, actually allow for filmmakers to do a lot of really cool special effects. So, like, for example, in the movie Lord of the Rings, Ian McKellen, the actor who plays Gandalf, and I think Ian Holmes, who plays Bilbo, are really the same height in real life, but they use camera tricks to make Gandalf appear a lot bigger than Bilbo. What they did was just have Bilbo stand closer to the camera, or I'm saying, actually have Bilbo be further from the camera and Gandalf closer to the camera, and have the camera angle in such a way that Gandalf just appears huge and Bilbo appears tiny, even though in actuality they're the same size. So this fact is the fact that primary qualities, in some sense, kind of vary from perceiver to perceiver, from perceptual situation to situation, and this allows for some really interesting special effects. And many of your dads, when they're on vacation, also are aware of this feature of perceptual relativity, which is why they take such hilarious pictures. So, someone might have an objection, though. Someone might say that we do know on independent grounds that the penny, for example, is really circular in shape and smaller than a chair, or that Bilbo and Gandalf are really the same size, or that Dad is not really that big, big compared to the Taj Mahal. Problem, though, this is what Berkeley would say. Yeah, there's something to it. Yeah, but can you really make this inference? Can you really say that you know that the penny's really circular? And this is what Berkeley will say. Berkeley will say that this is an inference that we are not entitled to make at this point. For we are examining only that of which we are directly aware, and that's our sensory ideas. And on this ground, our sensory ideas, the perceived shape and size of the penny, well, it actually varies from person to person or from place to place, just as its color does among perceivers. So in one situation, the penny is circular. In another situation, your sensory idea of the penny is elliptical. Well, on what basis then did you infer that the penny's really circular? Because all you have are these sensory ideas. More about that soon. So the argument then, in a nutshell, is that sensible qualities, like shape and size, vary according to the perceiver and her perspective and are thus relative to the perceiver. Well, the representative realist claim, recall, is that any property that varies in this way and is relative to the perceiver cannot be in the object, and so must be a mind-dependent quality. Oh man, I wonder what inference I'll draw from those two statements then. Thus, Berkeley will draw the conclusion that since all qualities vary in this way, all sensible qualities are mind-dependent. There is no distinction between primary mind-independent qualities and secondary mind-dependent qualities. Here's his argument then. We'll go through it and then maybe discuss how we can challenge it. Premise 1. All sensible qualities vary according to the perceiver and the perceiver's circumstances. Premise 2. Any quality that varies according to the perceiver and the perceiver's circumstances is a mind-dependent quality. Conclusion. So all sensible qualities are mind-dependent qualities. Well, this is a valid argument. The question is whether or not it's sound. Well, we've gotten arguments for premises 1 and 2 in these past few lectures. But if you were to challenge the argument, that is what you'd have to do, is you'd have to challenge premise 1 or 2. In addition to the variability argument, Berkeley offered a second argument for why there is in fact no distinction between primary and secondary qualities. He writes, and I won't try to imitate his British accent, "Now if it be certain that those original qualities are inseparably united with other sensible qualities, and not even in thought capable of being abstracted from them, it plainly follows that they exist only in the mind. But I desire anyone to reflect, and try whether he can, by abstraction of thought, conceive the extension and motion of a body extended and moving, but I must withal give it some color or other sensible quality, which is acknowledged to exist only in the mind. In short, extension, figure, and motion, abstracted from all other qualities, are inconceivable. Where therefore the other sensible qualities are, there so must these be also, to wit, in the mind and nowhere else." Let's unpack that. So here's an experiment that we're all going to do right now. You are all going to conduct this experiment with me. And it's not merely a thought experiment, although it's more of an imagination experiment. But it's an imagination experiment that's going to tell us about what we actually perceive. So here's the experiment. What I want you to do is close your eyes and imagine a circle. But imagine only the primary qualities of the circle. That is, only imagine the shape of the circle. But imagine the circle with the shape without any secondary qualities. So imagine the circle's shape without imagining any color to the circle. So I want you to imagine the geometric figure of the circle, the shape, without any colors. Alright, let's do this thought experiment. Imagine the circle. Imagine the shape of the circle, that is. Close your eyes, imagine the circle, but imagine it with no secondary qualities, no colors. Just imagine the shape, but no colors. Alright, yes, try it. Okay. Well, did you succeed? That is, were you able to imagine the primary qualities of the circle, the shape, without imagining it with any secondary qualities, that is, without any colors? No, you could not. Don't say you did, because you didn't. I know you didn't. I know it. You're lying if you say you did, or you misunderstand the thought experiment. Suppose you just imagine the shape like that. See? It's just the primary qualities. Nope. See the black line and the white foreground? That's primary qualities. White and black are colors as well. So Berkeley's going to contend that even in thought, the primary qualities cannot be separated from secondary qualities. You can't imagine a body extended and moving without the body having some color. Nor can you imagine the shape of a circle without the shape having some color. Try to imagine the shape of a kite without some color. Either some color shaped like a kite against the background, or else a kite-shaped border and some color contrasting with the background color. You can't do it. Recall, the perceptual relativity case gives us sufficient reason to believe that the secondary qualities, like color, cannot be in the object, but are instead mind-dependent. The candy is simply the way it is, and the candy itself does not go from sweet to bitter as we taste it. Sweetness and bitterness are not really in the candy. Instead, they're mind-dependent. They're secondary qualities. They're partially based on the constitution of the person perceiving, you. Well, if primary qualities are inseparably united with secondary qualities, as our experiment has just shown, oh man, this is disturbing, then primary qualities, too, must be mind-dependent. That means not only is Donald Trump's orange skin color mind-dependent, given that orange, being a secondary quality, is mind-dependent, so is the shape of Donald Trump. So here's the inseparability argument. Premise 1. Alleged secondary qualities must be mind-dependent. We've argued that extensively, and I'm not going to review it. Premise 2. Alleged primary qualities cannot be imagined separate from alleged secondary qualities. We just did a thought experiment that established premise 2. Conclusion. So-called primary qualities must be mind-dependent. Once again, the argument is valid. If you want to challenge it, you have to challenge the premises, but there's pretty good support for premises 1 and 2. So the conclusion then to the variability argument and the inseparability argument is twofold. First, all sensible qualities are mind-dependent. All sensible qualities. The shape, size, weight, motion, color, taste, smell, and so on are all sensory ideas that one is perceiving. Second, there's no distinction between mind-independent primary qualities and mind-dependent secondary qualities, contra the representative realist's claim. Okay, well, Berkeley's also going to challenge the causation and resemblance theses. So recall, according to representative realism, our sensory ideas are caused by the physical objects, and with the case of our primary quality ideas, they also resemble the physical objects. So these are two cornerstone theses of representative realism. Well, Berkeley's just kicked out two legs of the stool of representative realism by challenging the primary-secondary quality distinction via those two arguments that we just looked at. Now he's going to kick the other two legs by challenging the causation and resemblance theses. Yes, he was a dancer. He was a very good kicker. So the representative realist causation thesis, again, holds that physical objects cause our sensory ideas. That's one of the reasons why we can say that we indirectly perceive these physical objects, is because they are the cause of our sensory ideas. So the question then looms, how can we know that physical objects cause our sensory ideas? Well, we have that argument, the inference to the best explanation that we gave last lecture. Well, here's what Berkeley's going to say, though. To know that two events are causally connected, such as flipping a light switch, causing the light to go on, we have to observe both the cause and the effect. You flip the switch, the cause, and you see it, and then you see the light go on, the effect. Further, to know that an event type, such as flipping a light switch, causes another event type, such as a light turning on, we have to observe the causing event type with the effect event type regularly. So if you only see someone flick a switch once and a light go on once, you couldn't necessarily say that one caused the other. But if you see it happen all the time, which we've all grown up to know that when you flip the switch, the light goes on, unless of course the light bulb is to be changed. So then we can somehow say that the flipping the switch event causes the light going on event. For example, we also know that throwing rocks at windows causes the breaking of glass, because we have observed many events of the former type, throwing hard stuff, to have been followed by events of the latter type, something being broken. If we only saw the breaking of windows, but we never saw the throwing of rocks, we can reasonably say that window breakings are caused by rock throwings, because we'd only have access to effects, not causes. Well, here's the problem with representative realism. It holds that we only directly aware our sensory ideas, which are effects. So we only observe the effects, but we are never directly aware of the physical objects that allegedly cause our sensory ideas. So we're never directly aware of the causes. But if I can only observe my sensory ideas, then I cannot observe both the cause and the effect of any causal connection between physical objects and sensory ideas. You can only observe the effect. Well, the representative realist then can't claim that he knows that events involving physical objects cause events involving sensory ideas, because he or she has never directly observed the physical objects. By her own admission, we can never directly perceive external physical objects. Here's the argument then, and this is somewhat complicated, but it should make sense, so we'll walk through it one premise at a time. And the argument follows from what I'll call the causal principle, which I'll abbreviate as CP. To know that an event type C causes another event type E, we must regularly, directly perceive event tokens C hyphen causing event tokens E hyphen. So to know that flipping the switch causes the going on of lights, you have to regularly observe both. Premise 1 then. If the causation thesis is true, physical objects, which we'll abbreviate as POs, cause our sensory ideas, which we'll abbreviate as SIs. Premise 2. If POs cause our SIs, then we must regularly, directly perceive POs causing SIs. Premise 3. We regularly, directly perceive SIs. Premise 4. It is not the case that we directly perceive POs, and that's just by the dictates of representative realism itself. We only indirectly perceive them, if we perceive them at all. Premise 5. So it is not the case that we ever directly perceive POs causing SIs. Premise conclusion. So the causation thesis is false. Okay, it's a pretty powerful argument, and I think it's pretty plausible. Further, Berkeley's going to contend that the representative realists' claim that there's a causal connection between the external physical world and our sensory ideas is entirely misguided. He writes, "For though we give the materialists their external bodies, they by their own confession are never the nearer knowing how our ideas are produced, since they own themselves unable to comprehend in what manner body can act upon spirit, or how it is possible that it should imprint any idea on the mind." What does he mean by this? Well, physical objects are radically different from mental objects. But given that they're radically different, how could there be a causal connection between them? How can a physical thing cause a mental thing? And the representative realist causation thesis, according to Berkeley, can't explain the nature and source of our perceptual experiences then, if it cannot explain the causal connection itself. So then think about it. How can a physical thing cause a mental thing? Remember, physical things are extended, they're in space. Mental things, so not so much. Well, then what does the representative realist even mean by causation? For our idea of causation and causal powers arises from our experiences of causation. Well, according to Berkeley, our clearest understanding of causal powers actually arises from ourselves. That is, the clearest case of producing an idea arises when you, of your own will, produce an idea by imagining or thinking something. So you have some causal powers. Imagine a triangle. Imagine an elephant. Imagine a river. Imagine, recall the memory of a song you like. You're producing these ideas in some sense. You're producing these sensory ideas through your own will. You have these causal powers then. You're doing it right now. But, Berkeley writes, the making and unmaking of ideas doth very properly denominate the mind active. This much is certain in ground experience. But when we talk of unthinking agents, or of exciting ideas exclusive of volition, we only amuse ourselves with words. So going back, our best understanding of causal powers, of causation, comes from ourselves. We will something and then it happens. Okay? That is where we get our understanding of causation from. We have causal powers, and we do it through our own imagination and our thinking and our willing. Okay? But thinking about a physical object that's not, alive or in any sense, a book, a rock, a chair. How can that cause? It doesn't have a will. It doesn't have a mind and intellect. How can it cause anything then? Given our clearest understanding of causal powers, it would lack it. So how then could it cause sensory ideas in us? So Berkeley says we're just amusing ourselves with words then when we say that physical objects have these causal powers. In other words, then, when we talk about the causal powers of inert physical objects, once again, we're amusing ourselves with words. These physical objects have no wills, they're unthinking, and so on. So, for Berkeley, it's perfectly coherent to say that our minds can produce sensory ideas, but it's not at all coherent to say that inert physical objects can produce sensory ideas. For thinking just is the producing and perceiving ideas. Unthinking objects, simply because they're not minds, do not have the ability to produce ideas. So just to elaborate some further then, our best understanding of causal powers comes from our own thinking and imagining and willing and stuff. But what do we produce? We produce sensory ideas. So our best understanding of how sensory ideas are produced comes from our own thinking, imagining, and willing. Physical objects don't think, imagine, or will. How can then we say that they produce sensory ideas? Berkeley says we have no basis to say that. We're amusing ourselves with words. Alright, lastly, Berkeley is also going to challenge the resemblance thesis. And he's going to criticize it on two separate grounds. He writes, and this is a long quote, "But, say you, though the ideas themselves do not exist without the mind, yet there may be things like them, whereof they are copies or resemblances, which things exist without the mind, in an unthinking substance. I answer, an idea can be like nothing but an idea. A color figure can be like nothing but another color figure. If we look but never so little into our thoughts, we shall find it impossible for us to conceive a likeness except only between our ideas. Again, I ask whether these supposed originals or external things, of which our ideas are the pictures or representations, be themselves perceivable or not. If they are, then they are ideas, and we have gained our point. But if you say they are not, I appeal to anyone whether it be sense to assert a color is like something which is invisible, hard or soft, like something which is intangible, and so of the rest." Let's unpack this then. One way to read this passage is to understand Berkeley is simply saying that since we can only be directly aware of our ideas, we could never know whether ideas are copies or resemblances of external things. Think about it. And here's the objection. It's well, actually, let's take a step back. So, you directly perceive a sensory idea of a chair, okay? It's not like you can take that sensory idea, unzip your brain, step out of your body, and then look directly at the actual physical chair, and then step back into your body, zip up your brain, and then look at your sensory idea, and then compare the two. You can't do that. So the objection then is in the form of a dilemma. Either one, the primary or original qualities of the object are directly observed, or two, they are not. Well, let's take a look at one then. If the representative realists were to agree that primary qualities are directly observed, then in a way they would agree with Berkeley. Because Berkeley says, remember that Berkeley earlier argued, in challenging the primary and secondary quality distinction, that primary qualities are not in the external objects after all, but they're mind-dependent like secondary qualities. But a good representative realist would surely deny that all qualities of objects are in our minds. So the representative realist must agree with 2 then, that we are not directly aware of the properties of external objects. 2 is then that they are not directly observed. But, as Berkeley would object, the representative realist could not then say that our sensory ideas resemble those unobservable physical objects, for by the realist's very admission, as a dictate of their very theory, we do not directly observe external physical objects. Again, you can't step outside of your brain and look at the actual physical object and then compare it to the sensory idea. Further, we especially do not observe the physical objects and then compare them with our sensory ideas, as I just said. And here's a plausible principle. One cannot know that x resembles y unless one can observe and compare both x and y. If you cannot know what x is like, you cannot know whether it resembles y. You can't say, I resemble that kid from Toy Story who used to blow up the toys, unless you have seen me and the kid from Toy Story and you can compare the two. But we can't compare our sensory ideas with physical objects. So let's do another thought experiment then. Take your sensory idea of a cup, inspect it, pay close attention to the qualities in your sensory idea. After you have inspected your sensory idea, try to compare that sensory idea to the actual real physical mind in the cup. And I've mentioned this before, but you can't do it, right? You can't do it. It's not like you stepped outside your mind and looked carefully at the cup. And then after inspecting the cup, you step back into your mind and compare what you saw to your sensory idea. All you can compare your sensory ideas to are other sensory ideas. You can only really know if a sensory idea resembles another sensory idea. You can't know if a sensory idea resembles a physical object. You can compare your sensory idea of a cup to another sensory idea of a cup. You can compare your sensory idea of a chair to a sensory idea of a cup. But you can't compare your sensory idea of a cup to a real, physical, external, mind-independent cup, according to this argument. Here's the argument then, challenging the resemblance thesis. Premise 1. If a person P knows that his or her sensory idea, SI, resembles a physical object, PO, P must have direct perceptual access to SI and direct perceptual access to PO. And that follows from this principle. So premise 1 just follows from this principle. And it's just common sense. Premise 2, it is not the case that we have direct perceptual access to POs. Again, it's that thought experiment. Conclusion, so it is not the case that a person P knows that his or her sensory ideas resemble physical objects. And again, if you don't like the argument, you have to challenge the premises. But we've got good reasons for both premises 1 and 2. The end.